But then how interesting is it for you to really have then your own immigrant experience?
Absolutely.
When you moved to, did you move to London?
So I have lived in 3 different European countries. I actually first moved to Paris. I moved to Paris to study. So I was studying at a school there called Sciences Po. I've since been told, I didn't realize at the time, that is kind of the equivalent of Harvard.
Okay.
And so great news for me because I didn't get into Harvard here. So I went and studied
So I went to
there.
Paris.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, Ma, are you proud of me?
Oh, God.
Still not there. Asian parents, it'd be like that sometimes.
Are you proud of me yet?
Cut deep.
I know.
But, oops, sorry. I first moved to Paris, and that was a huge culture shock. I loved it, though, being in Europe, and that's what ultimately made me decide to pursue a life in Europe. And so I then moved to the UK, briefly lived in Austria as well. So I've kind of like hopped around, and now London is home. So the immigrant experience has been very interesting, also given that it comes from a place of privilege. So I think a lot of people will refer to me as an expat. I don't love that term expat because I think there is this purposeful delineation of you're an expat if you are wealthy, or often if you are white, living in a place that is non-white or is, an emerging market or something like that. Don't love the term, but we're all immigrants at the end of the day, whether you're an expat or you're a refugee, right? And so it definitely comes with privilege and passport privilege to come from the US, but there are definitely some challenges that are difficult to overcome when you move countries, and that remains true regardless of your socioeconomic background.
I mean, and even though you came from the US, I mean, your parents are immigrants, you're brown.
I am brown.
It's a different, me, brown.
Me? Have you
seen me?
Have
you seen this beauty? Yeah, no, it's but that's a whole other thing. That's like a whole different experience, right? And so you're going from, I don't know what Silicon Valley is like in terms of predominantly white, but I've got a feeling it maybe is. But although probably a large Asian population as well.
Lots of Asians, and it's been really interesting to watch over the 30 years of my life, where it's like we have some really banging like Chinese, Taiwanese, Korean, Japanese food, Indian food now, but it wasn't always that way, and even now in hindsight, I think about some experiences that my dad would tell me about, or overhearing them growing up and thinking, oh, it's weird that this is happening to my dad. And now as an adult, be like, oh, that was racism. Oh, understood.
Got it.
Understood. Or even, like my mother was a QA engineer for many, many decades, and constantly being passed over for promotions and that sort of thing, because being East Asian, it was like, oh, you're an East Asian woman, so you're docile and quiet. And you can't be in a managerial position.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So it is interesting how far we've come, but also how far we still have to go.
Yeah, no, it is so apparent. I mean, it makes me think of, it's funny, my mom's experience is that, she came to America and found her knight in shining armor, if you will, in my very, very white father. Jeff, we love Jeff. And so, but it's funny because there's been times when me and Anton, we've sat down with her and she's like, I've never experienced racism. And I'm like, oh yeah. And
tell me more about that.
Tell me about it. She's like, but then she proceeds to tell us the story of how when we were growing up as kids and she would take us to school. And me and my mom's like a darker skinned Filipino woman, and she and her kids are not. And so she just looks very different than us. And so she was like, these women would think I was the nanny. They never thought that these were my kids. And ever since then, she's like, so you know what I do now? I make sure, and she's been doing it her whole life. She wears big jewelry, and she's always dressed up, and she always has her makeup done, and she's very glamorous. I love that about my mom, but it's
fascinating.
But it was a response, and I was like, so Mom, that's racism. You've experienced it.
How interesting, because we're both mixed race, aren't we? And so I also don't share the same surname as my mother. And so I very clearly remember instances of that where it's like, we're looking for Nina Mohanty's mom, and my mother would kind of pop them like, that's me, like this tiny little Asian woman. And they'd be like, no, Nina Mohanty's mom. this brown girl's mom. And my mom would be like, that's me. And it was just,
Mom.
yeah. And like that's my biological mother. Like I came out, people to this day, there's certain facial features that we have in common. I think when they hear me speaking Mandarin with my mom, then they're like, okay, we see what happened here. But it is definitely, it's so interesting being mixed race as well.
It
That's
is.
like an added
It
dimension
is. Yeah, being biracial is like a whole special experience. I like wish we had our own club because, and because it's usually whenever someone asks me about my own story, I always have to describe it as like, well, growing up biracial, especially when your other half is white, it's like this weird thing because you like have all this privilege, but also like you're not allowed in these like specific circles because you're just not white enough.
You never fit in.
Yes, you never.
anywhere.
Yeah, and then even like in an Asian group, they're like, do we want her here?
Yes. Exactly.
But anyway, so it is a weird dynamic, but we've leveraged it as our superpower.